Welcome back to PetaPixel. It is Chris Niccolls here. Today we're playing with the Canon EOS R100, probably the most affordable camera that I've reviewed in a very long time. We're talking years. So it is just the summer of forest fires out here in Canada. You can see again another hazy day as usual. It's pretty bad today. So I'm not expecting any amazing telephoto shots today, but we do have this very simple, very compact camera to go play with. So let's get right down to handling. So the R100 is a very compact, lightweight body. I mean, 355 grams with a battery. That's just in between a sixth, a fifth of a knock. This is a very compact design, similar to the R50, or actually reminds me a lot of the SLR body designs. The grip is small and stubby for sure. I mean, I can hold on to it quite comfortably, but my pinky finger, my ring finger are well off the grip. They're just dangling there, but you still feel like you got a secure purchase. So everything about this camera is very bare bones, including the handling. We only have the one command dial here, and so it's going to have to do multiple jobs. I mean, you're basically using a toggle button to go between aperture control, shutter control, and the exposure compensation. I just have to keep tapping that exposure comp button, get the control that I want to change highlighted, and then use the command dial to change it. I mean, if I'm just in aperture priority, it's not a big deal, or if I'm just in shutter priority, but if I'm starting to do manual controls, it does get a little bit fiddly, a little bit clunky. On the back of the camera, we just got a very simple directional pad. This is where I've got the exposure compensation toggle. This is also where I can change my ISO, I can change my drive settings, my flash controls. This does have a pop-up flash, but you do have to pop it up yourself manually. So pop it up if you want to have it fire, shut it if you don't. You can have it set to automatically decide to fire or not, as long as you have it popped up as well. And of course, we do have a classic hot shoe on there. Otherwise, there's not a lot to customize on here. The buttons are very straightforward. So although it's a very simple interface, it's also a very limiting one. So under the grip, we've got our battery and our SD card slot. It's a Canon LPE17 battery. That's what I expected. We see this in so many other compact cameras. And of course, battery life, as you can see, isn't going to be stellar. It's just a UHS 1 card slot for SD. I mean, again, they're really just going very basic and very affordable parts throughout this camera. So we got this beautiful little Alberta wild rose growing here, really tiny. I'm gonna take a shot of it. So I'm going through my autofocusing menus here. Now we do have the option to go to a spot AF, which is just a small box, or then we can go to like a 1-point AF, which is kind of a bit bigger box. And then I can go to a zone, a larger zone. And I can, if I choose these things, move the box around. I can use the control dial to scroll all the way through my screen, or I can use the directional pad, but it's a little bit slow. It really does feel like I'm using an old camera style, but I can actually then selectively move my box over, focus on the flower, and get my shot. Now the R100 also does have a face and eye detect option, and this is really nice. This is kind of your only tracking capability. There's no other subject detections on this camera, so all these puppies running around, I'd be back to using just like a zone or something to try to focus on them. But as you can see here with Jordan, it is focusing on his eye very effectively and actually very quickly, even in continuous autofocus. So I like that. Portraits, kid shots, family stuff, it's going to do a really good job. It's just using the full wide area, and then it will look for faces in that area. What I don't have here is a dedicated tracking mode, which is to say, having a point, putting that on an inanimate object, and then have the camera track that as I recompose. I really like that feature, but it is completely missing here. Okay, so let's talk about displays. We're going to start with the EVF. Now, resolution-wise, we're 2.36 million dots, which is absolutely comparable to everything else in this price range, even certainly cameras that are higher cost than this, but it doesn't quite have the same specs as other 2.36 million dot EVFs. Again, it's all about making something more affordable. So for example, this only refreshes up to 60 frames per second versus 120 frames per second in things like the Canon R50 and many other cameras above it. And the magnification's not that great either, so it kind of looks like you're looking down a tunnel towards your composition. Playback seems a little bit small even when I zoom in, but there are worse viewfinders out there on the market. I mean, the Sony a6100 still probably has the lowest resolution. So for this price, I think it's actually okay. But now let's talk about the back panel. Now this is incredibly bare bones. I mean, first off, just over 1 million dots resolution, no articulation whatsoever, but here's the most egregious thing. Canon's really trying to market this towards smartphone users as a very simple way to get into a bigger sensor, but you have no touchscreen capability. And with an interface that's already very simplistic and kind of clunky, to take away the touchscreen, well, it's certainly not going to endear this camera to smartphone users. It's not going to endear this camera to anybody. And really, Canon usually do such a great job with their touchscreen implementation that it really elevates their cameras as far as handling goes. So it's really sad to see it missing here. So the Canon R100 can shoot basically 3 frames per second if you're using continuous autofocus, and just over 6 if you're doing single shot. Now, if we shoot in JPEG, even at 6 frames per second, it'll basically go and go and go. But if we change over to RAW, things change very quickly. At 6 frames per second, your RAW buffer is gonna fill up in about 1.5 seconds. You're gonna get about 8 or 9 shots, and then it's gonna stop. And if you go RAW plus JPEG, you're only gonna get about 6 shots, and then it's gonna stop. In continuous servo, we can expect to double that time roughly. But you know, I would say if I was gonna shoot kids running and jumping, sports, that kind of thing, and I really wanna have a sustained rate, I guess I'd shoot JPEG only. If I really wanna shoot RAW, I can't expect long bursts. So as Canon walks this tight rope between cost and performance on the R100, I walk this tight rope on this ledge to share next with you image quality here. So one of the things that actually doesn't bother me on this camera is the sensor. It's a 24 megapixel APS-C sensor. I think that's great. Sensor technology hasn't changed in a long time, and this takes beautiful photos. Also, it doesn't have a mechanical shutter per se. I mean, it does, but it's using electronic front curtain shutter only, and so you're only getting the mechanical part in the second stage of the exposure taking. Now, this actually gives you a really nice quiet shutter and a very stable platform. I am actually finding when I take pictures, the camera doesn't move at all, which is great. And the only issue that electronic front curtain shutters can actually cause is sometimes you'll get truncated bokeh if you're using a very wide aperture lens, like a bright prime. You might get your bokeh looking a little bit funny, but frankly, that's not really going to be an issue here. I don't expect people to be putting on a lot of the full frame prime lenses with wide apertures on here, so it's kind of a non-issue. Overall, actually, I think it's a good choice. It's really stable. So let me tell you a little story about Jordan's experience here recently. He was going to take some sample photos on the R100, heading out to Yoho National Park, beautiful part of the country, and he brought the R100, plugged in the USB port in the car, thinking, okay, the battery's dead, but it'll be fully charged when we get there. It's a long drive, and I'll get my shots. Lo and behold, he arrives, and the camera is still completely empty. And that's because you have no USB charging on this camera. There's no way to charge the camera simply like that. You have to use the external charger provided. Totally inconvenient. You know what smartphone users really like? Plugging their phone in with a USB cord and having it charge. This camera is appealing to smartphone users, but you're gonna have to carry a brick around, I'm afraid. Okay, so we got a simple camera here. I want to try some of the creative filters, just see what they're like. We actually have 4 HDR modes here, which is pretty interesting. A standard mode, one that's more vivid, graphic looking. We got a bold oil painting looking one, and then sort of a faded, embossed, old style painting. I mean, they're all kind of funny, but they take 3 continuous shots, and because the camera's so stable, you can hand hold that nice and stable. It'll take the 3 shots, and then it will combine them in camera, fun effects. And then we also have some of the other classic ones you've seen before: grainy black and white, soft focus, miniature effect, toy effect, sort of fake fisheye effect. I'm gonna try the grainy black and white here because I always love this almost dead tree. And you can have fun with this kind of stuff. I'll probably never do it ever again after that particular time, but that looks grainy and black and white, so mission accomplished. Okay, so now I'm gonna try that HDR vivid mode here. I got some flowers, and actually this does a pretty interesting effect. But we got wind blowing some of these pink flowers, and yeah, if I look at the shot there, it looks kind of like, superimposed flowers on the background, and then anywhere the flowers move, you kind of get this funny ridge, this sort of outline. I don't know, it's kind of cool. It's art. It's an art filter. It's art. So Canon clearly intend the R100 to be the gateway drug into the RF lens mount, but the issue with that is we still don't have a lot of dedicated APS-C lenses for this camera system. We still really have the 3 zooms, so 18 to 45, the 55 to 210, which is an f5 to 7.1. I mean, that's pretty slow. And then the 18 to 150. And again, all 3 of these lenses are perfectly fine. We like them. It's just they're not very flexible. There's no fast aperture primes, there's no dedicated portrait lenses, there's no dedicated macro lenses, and so you're forced to buy then full frame RF lenses, but then you're paying for glass that you don't necessarily need for such a small camera with a smaller sensor. Now Canon might build some lenses in the future, I'm sure they will, and of course the benefit there is if you make dedicated lenses for the sensor size, then you'll get things that are just smaller or brighter or cheaper or all three of those. So that's kind of what we're hoping going forward. But you know, otherwise you don't have a lot of support. You could get EF lens to RF mount adapter, but those adapters are expensive. We're trying to keep the cost down obviously with a camera like this, and again you're back to bulkier lenses on this system. It's just not an ideal setup.
All right, it's Jordan to talk about using the Canon R100 for video capture, and right now Chris is filming me handheld in a mode I would absolutely not recommend that you use, which is the 4K 24p recording. The reason I say you shouldn't use it is, first of all, there is a significant crop on top of your existing APS-C crop. As well, this disables your dual pixel autofocus when you engage this mode. A little bit jittery, moving back and forth sometimes. You'll definitely notice that with pieces to camera, especially with shallower depth of field lenses. As well, the rolling shutter is absolutely atrocious, even with the crop. This is not something where you're going to want to walk around recording 4K video. Okay, so now Chris has switched over to the enhanced stabilization, which does a pretty good job for static shots like this, though we do still have some real jello effect in the video there. But honestly, let's just ditch the 4K, go over to what this camera is capable of doing, which is 1080 recording. Okay, so now Chris has turned off the digital stabilization, switched over to 1080p recording, and you can see it's much wider, and then this also gives us more options for frame rates. Now we can shoot 1080, 30, and 60. We can even do some slow motion, 720, 120p recording, and there's a lot less limitations here. We get the dual pixel autofocus back. Honestly, it's usable. The big thing is, since the M50 came out like 6 years ago, things have really progressed. Chances are your smartphone is giving you 4K recording at a variety of frame rates, so it's really hard to make a case for using a dedicated camera that's only capable of 1080 with all of these caveats. I mean, I would buy this as a fun photography camera, but for video, move up to the R50. There you're getting full width 4K, you're getting much more reliable autofocus. It's just a far better video camera for a similar price.
So it may sound from the review that I'm not very enamored with this camera. I'm actually pretty underwhelmed by it, and I don't consider it to be that compelling a product. But let me speak some truths about the shooting experience that I had. I mean, did I enjoy my day walking around with this cute, compact little camera? Yes, absolutely. I mean, it takes beautiful photos. I basically operated an aperture priority, you know, very automatic point and shoot kind of experience, and it was fun. And I could see having a couple of the dedicated APS-C zooms and like maybe a nifty 50. You could have a lot of fun with this just walking around. But I will say this, it's lacking a lot of the modern features that we take for granted now on cameras, like tracking autofocus, subject detection, you know, touchscreen interfaces. I really felt like I was shooting an old camera. This actually felt like I was back into an SLR or something like that, or a very early mirrorless camera experience. And so I think because of that, the clunky interface, the fact that manual control is a little bit slower to adjust than it needs to be, the fact that there's no touchscreen, the goal of this trying to win over smartphone users, I just don't think it's really going to do that very well. Now, I do get that some people might want to keep things as affordable as possible, you know, get into the RF lens mount and just have as simple an experience as possible. And there's some merit there, and this certainly does achieve that. But I do feel like there's other products that are worth looking at that might even be a better option. So one that comes to mind at a very similar price is the Canon EOS M50 Mark II kit. And the M50 Mark II is a nice camera. I mean, it's even smaller. You get way more lens choices available, really nice dedicated APS-C lenses that we've used before and actually really enjoy. You get a touchscreen interface. I mean, I think that camera's got a lot going for it. Or if you can afford just a little bit more money, I do think the value for the dollar is better with the Canon EOS R100, a more sophisticated camera, again, with a touchscreen interface, better autofocus by far, tracking autofocus, subject detection autofocus, better video capabilities, articulating screen. I mean, I really think that this is a really compelling way to get more out of the RF lens mount. It's a little bit more money now, but I think you'll be future-proof for a much longer time. So were we blown away by this camera? No. Could you have fun with this camera though? Absolutely you can. And Hopefully this video is going to help you decide if this is a good purchase for you or not. Let us know in the comments below if you agree or disagree, or if you have any thoughts. We'd love to hear that. Check out our podcast. We're right here on the same channel, or you can listen to us on all your favorite podcasting apps. Just look for PetaPixel Podcast and you'll find us there. Otherwise, check out our socials. Please do like and subscribe to the channel. We always want to see that building. Thanks so much for anybody who is doing that today. And we'll see you soon with more episodes on PetaPixel.
Always, all days, all nights, sing do I do.